Ain't no priest gonna save my soul, my soul.
So hello and welcome to Let's Talk with John Kane. I am John Kane, flying a bit solo today. Shawnee Rice will be back with us next week, and we'll hear all about her trip. I'm not completely solo, though. I do have a friend joining me via Skype from Europe. I've got Jeremiah Hosea, who is joining me, and we'll talk about. We're going to talk about some politics. We're going to talk about
Absolutely.
some of the difficulties associated with bad choices, and you know, I said the politics of not my job. We're going to talk about how one of the problems with the way the system is too many people think that they can just go into a voting booth, pull a lever, and say, "There, my job is done. I don't have to do anything more. Now I've performed my civic responsibility for 2 years, 4 years, or whatever the case might be, or maybe for a lifetime. I made that one vote that mattered." And you know what? That one vote didn't matter. We have work to do, folks, and it goes well beyond casting a vote. I'm going to talk about some of my adventures I've had with battling some of my own folks, because I'm going to flat out say it. My position is that Native people living on a Native territory, mind you, and that's a very small population, I don't think Native people should vote in non-Native elections. We have our own governments. We have our own territorial integrity. We have responsibilities that we should be maintaining ourselves without looking to elect, some white man or some non-Native or even a Native person into Congress or the Senate or into the presidency or the governorship or state assembly or whatever the case may be. I think that we should be standing as distinct people, because, again, I talk about population. Native people represent, if you include us in the U.S. population, which I'm not sure that we should be, but if you include us, we represent less than 0.7% of the U.S. population. That's a small number. Now, if you want to break it down to the people who are actually living on a Native territory, it's less than half that. So we only represent 2 or 3%, 2 or 0.3% as far as a Native population living as distinct people in a distinct territory. Now, I'm not saying you lose your Native identity if you don't live on a Native territory, but you have a different responsibility in terms of who is representing you and where you live. And so when I take the position that Native people shouldn't vote in these state and national elections, trust me, that is not the popular opinion, even in Indian country. I get blasted. "Oh, how dare you say Native people shouldn't vote? How are we ever going to change things?" I'm thinking, well, how is 0.2% who don't vote as one unified block anyway? How are we going to change anything from? Name me one time that the rebel said, "Okay, here's the plan. We're going to join the other side and fix it from within." I mean, when does that ever happen? So anyway, that's the conversation that I want to have a little bit with Jeremiah. Before I get into it too much, rebels. Before I get into it too much, let me just say I am hoping that we can solicit a few more of you to join WBAI by becoming a buddy. You can go to the pledge line 516-620-3602. You can go to the website, which is www.give2wbai.org. And sign up, be a buddy, and list this show as the show that you are becoming a buddy on behalf of. It doesn't singularly help this show. I mean, if you become a buddy, you make a contribution, you help all the programs, you help every one of the programs that air here, and of course you help the station. But it puts a little bit of a feather in our cap to know that we sign some buddies up and that we. And then we have people listening. So that's my pitch for this show, and I'm going to pretty much do that every week, whether we're in Fund Drive or not. So, all right, let me not waste any more time. Let me go ahead and introduce Jeremiah Hosea. Jeremiah, we go back a long ways now.
We do.
We've done some radio together, both on First Voices, and you've joined me on this show a number of times. And it seems like you and I were, via Facebook and other social media, we've been having some of the similar conversations with folks that aren't necessarily our enemies, but folks that have some very serious problems when we offer a counter narrative to what they're used to.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well, John, and it's a pleasure and honor to be on your program. I'm actually in the city of Minsk in Belarus, so this is a first for me. I've been on the BAI airwaves on numerous occasions over the years now, but I've actually never been on air from another country. So that's kind of interesting and fun, and I'm really excited to be on the program today.
Yeah, when I first reached out to you, I forgot that you were still traveling, and and I've watched some of these conversations, and you and I participated in some of them together on Facebook and stuff. So I think, you know what, I wonder if I can get Jeremiah to join me here, because I'm having my battle amongst my own people on again on this idea of us voting and thinking that we can change things from within. By participating. And look, they even had that native presidential candidates forum last week, and there was a lot of hype about that, and I got asked a number of questions. Well, what were my thoughts and all that other stuff? And I want to go into a bunch of it, but one of the things that you've been challenged with is every time you suggest that, look, if anybody thinks that there's the Trump, the antithesis of Trump is Obama. And we can make some of that argument from certain characteristics of the people. Look, I think Obama is certainly, somebody who demonstrates a greater sense of morality when it comes to being a husband and a father and a human being. I mean, in general, we can make that argument. I think he obviously is well read. He's well written. He's well spoken. None of those things are Donald Trump. So if you're only going to measure those two people based on those things, then yes, you can. Obviously, he's a different color, so you can make a clear distinction. But if you're going to look at policy, and this is where you every time you bring up policy,
I have so many things to say, John. I mean, I don't even. I just rein me in if I start getting out of control.
Well, but my point is, every time you mention, well, let's not forget Obama did this. Everybody says, "Oh, don't pick on my Obama." So there you go. Yeah, I'm launching you.
That upsets me.
Go off.
Well, yeah, I mean, let me get into a bunch of things here and just jump in, interrupt me at will. But let me say, first of all, there's never been a good president of the United States, and I defy someone to convince me otherwise. George Washington, the first president, slave owner, and actually I've heard a brutal slave owner, quite particularly brutal to his slaves. Let's jump ahead to Abraham Lincoln, who signed the Emancipation Proclamation.
Don't even skip Thomas Jefferson, though. I'm
sorry.
Yeah,
Thomas Jefferson.
Because not only was he a slave owner
of American liberalism, he was a slave owner and a serial rapist.
Well, not only that, though. I mean, here's one of the things that I always got to bring up, and I'm only going to interrupt you just for a little bit. Thomas Jefferson was actually devious. I mean, and not just did he represent a lot of these flaws, but he had a deviousness about him. He actually wrote a letter that was supposed to be a private letter that somehow got into the public consciousness to Henry Harrison. Henry Harrison, he was the governor of the territory of Indiana, and ultimately he would become president only for a couple of months because he died in office. But he wrote a letter to Henry Harrison, and he basically said, "Look, here's how we're going to maintain peace with the Indians. We're going to try to extract their affection from them. We want them to love us. We don't have to love them back, but we want them to really key on their affection. And you know what? We want to sell them stuff because we have stuff that they want, and you know what? They've got stuff that we want. They got land. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to sell them, and we're not even going to jack up the price. We're going to keep the price. We're going to get all our shopkeepers to sell them products at a low price, but offer them extensive lines of credit. Because once they get to the point where they are in debt and they can't handle that debt anymore, they'll lop off that debt with their lands. And once we got them surrounded, then they're either going to find no sense in maintaining who they are. They're either going to leave, move out west of the Mississippi. We'll even help them move, or we'll just assimilate them to the point where they just cease to exist as individual people. And in doing so, we get to fulfill our final, he actually used this expression, our final consolidation without ever even offending them. But should they resist, we'll crush them, we'll destroy them, and we'll force them all of them off their lands and push them west of the Mississippi. So that's Thomas Jefferson, again, the father of liberalism, the enlightened one. So, so even the ones who, you know, and I say this because just because somebody talks kindly and nicely and articulate and has all these great words and
it's actually somewhat irrelevant.
Well,
you know what's an interesting moral point?
Yeah.
You know what's an interesting moral point, John, is that, and I'm not proposing inaction because I'm an activist and you're an activist, and I think we should all be activists and as involved as we can be. But let me make a moral point here, which is that your morality is first of all defined by what you do not do. I would rather that you sit on your couch and frankly do nothing than harm someone and then think that you can make up for it with charitable deeds.
Or justify it. Or justify
I'm a moral realist.
Yeah.
I'm a moral realist to that extent. If you can't molest a child and then donate money to a children's charity. That's not how it works. So you first of all define, or the first basis of your morality is what you do not do. And, that's a problem. I don't want to jump fast forward to Obama because I had my little quick list of Abraham Lincoln. No, not a good president. He was explicitly a racist. He said over and over again, I don't respect the humanity of African people. The Emancipation Proclamation is a matter of political exigency. John F. Kennedy, another person who, a lot of mythology is built around, but John F. Kennedy was a protagonist in the Vietnam War. He effectively started the Vietnam War, which was a genocide, which most American people
John
just
Kennedy,
are frankly not aware.
I can tell a little bit more of a personal story. There was an effort to solve the flooding problem with Pittsburgh. And one of the solutions wasn't even the best solutions. One of the solutions was to dam up the Allegheny River. And in doing so, that meant you had to flood out or put into a floodplain 10,000 acres of Seneca land. And there were other options. But Kennedy, because he was so worried about not winning Pennsylvania, supported the flooding, the taking of this land through the Army Corps of Engineers and creating the Kinzua Dam. Johnny Cash wrote a song about it. He said, "Corn planter, can you swim?" in a song called Lake Perfidy. But John Kennedy, so he knew what he was doing was wrong because he actually wrote letters. They're in the museum at the Seneca Museum where he apologizes for it. Sorry what I did to you. But he was only sorry. He knew that he was doing this only to get elected. He would not stand. He knew this was wrong. So so when we talk about morality, when you say no, my political, my rise in the political power is more important than the Seneca people. We're gonna, and they actually had to burn, bulldoze, destroy Seneca villages, and then relocate them into these, crappy little HUD homes. And this is the Seneca territory of Allegheny. So, so again, as you talk about, we have a word for the president. We call it "run the Gaius," and it goes back to George Washington, and it's about all these presidents being town destroyers. And you're right. It includes, Kennedy, Teddy Roosevelt. He was another devout racist and imperialist. So you're right. None of them.
I'll be honest with you. I'm not the most knowledgeable when it comes to presidential history. It just doesn't excite me enough. I try to read as much as I can. I wish I knew more about, the presidents 1 through 45. In chronological order. I'm more of the guy to read offbeat philosophy and other kinds of things. But as I've read a lot of Noam Chomsky, and Noam Chomsky has made the provocative statement that if you use the standards of Nuremberg, every post-World War II American president would have to be hanged as a war criminal.
Well, and I saw it
continues to this day.
You posted that, and I said, and how convenient is it that they crafted the language of the Nuremberg, these protocols that still allowed the United States to avoid being prosecuted as a war criminal for being the only country in history to drop 2 nuclear weapons on civilian targets. That's amazing.
And the thing is, I say, for example, provocatively myself, people have been enraged in some cases when I said, well, Barack Obama is a war criminal. Well, how could you say that? Well, because he was involved in the attack against Libya. His administration authorized an attack against the sovereign nation of Libya. And, the basis is you basically can't go around killing people. It's
Well,
not an incredibly complicated legal thing. Like the same way I can't walk around the streets with a pistol and blow someone away and say, I did that in case the guy was going to rob me. Well, that's not okay.
well,
You
look at
can't
the
preemptively
elevation
murder.
in drone striking and that kind of stuff. That's an Obama legacy. I mean, he ratcheted that up in a way that no other president before him has ever done, or since.
Yeah,
There may have been
Yemen.
more people killed by drone strike during Obama than certainly if you drag out 2 years of Trump.
Yeah, and actually, that's one thing that's really interesting, John, and maybe we could pause and just talk about this for a minute, which is that everyone is appalled by Trump, and that includes me. I mean, what's happening with these detention centers, it's outrageous. The language that is coming out of the presidential office is appalling, disgusting, outrageous. So please, let me make it clear, I am no Trump supporter, and I warned leftists that Donald Trump poses a particular threat level, that he's basically backed by a fascist mass movement. And I still think Donald Trump is quite a threat. We're at risk of war by miscalculation, I believe is the term, maybe more than ever before because of his recklessness and because of his tweets and so on and so on. But along those Chomskyan guidelines, he's actually, up till this point, and I'm knocking on wood, less of a war criminal than these other presidents. I mean, he dropped his Moab bomb, which I don't know what the death toll on that was, but it wasn't. He only killed maybe 10 people officially through his Moab, like only 10 people. I mean, well, he's a murderer, even if he killed one innocent person. But he actually, despite his tough talk against Iran and so on, and again, I'm knocking on wood, because I don't want human beings to be harmed. But it drives me personally a little bit crazy that we're so offended by tweets and comments, which we should be, but you're not offended in some cases by actual atrocities. Like I've mentioned to my own family members who in some cases, are huge Obama supporters. And I say, well, the invasion of Libya just removes him permanently from my list of heroes. And they'll angrily defend Obama. Well, that was a mistake. Really? You can murder people on a massive scale and write it off as a mistake?
Well, and Libya is still a mess to this day. I mean, this wasn't just the idea, that you inflicted damage on a country. No, you destroyed it. It's a failed state, like you said.
They bombed hospitals. Listen, I heard right here on these BAI airwaves reports on the ground from Libya, right as the invasion was starting. They bombed hospitals. They bombed the University of Tripoli. They bombed the treasury where their money is made. They effectively bombed them into the Stone Age. And Libya was actually higher on UN indices than a lot of countries you wouldn't expect, like Russia, like Brazil. The average Libyan spoke 4 languages. If you got married in Libya, the government gave you a house and $10,000. There was a lot of positive things actually happening in Libya on a per capita basis. I'm sure it was a problematic society, and I can't speak to the crimes and the career of Gaddafi, but I do know that Gaddafi was proposing a unified African currency, which might have upset some people. I know that they have oil reserves in Libya, and I don't know all the other features of why that invasion had to occur. But, another excuse I hear is, oh, well, Obama didn't do that himself. That was at the behest of Hillary Clinton, or, Italy and France were involved, which is absolutely true. But can you or I defend ourselves in court? Can we rob a bank and say, oh, well, I didn't rob a bank. I robbed it with my buddies.
Yeah. Well, and Hillary bragged of this, and so all these folks that wanted to endorse her, including Obama, and I, only because I don't want this to get left off the list. The biggest event that drew attention to Native plight was Standing Rock, and that was a complete Barack Obama administration development. He traveled, and bragged that he was going to be the first sitting president to travel into Indian country and meet with a native leader. He went to Standing Rock, and ironic of all places for him to go, because if there was any place that had access to the president of the United States and any native territory, it was the Standing Rock Sioux. Why is that? Well, because the tribal chairman of the Standing Rock Sioux was Dave Archambault. His sister was Jody Archambault Gillette, or Gillette Archambault, you want to call her, was the senior policy advisor to Barack Obama. I actually met with her over a conflict with the Obama administration over a tax issue. But so Standing Rock had access. He goes to Standing Rock, actually goes up to Cannonball, which is even more definitively the ground zero for this battle that would ensue. He gave a speech quoting Sitting Bull, talking about having to how necessary it was to build something for the future of the children of the Standing Rock Sioux, of the Lakota people. And what gets built? A pipeline. That was all on the Obama administration. And just because it got finished by Donald Trump doesn't mean that it wasn't an Obama issue. The whole conflict all transpired. And at the same time, the same thing that you're experiencing. Even Dave Archambault, certainly Jody Gillette, so many native leaders. Oh, but we love Obama. He is the reason that you're having this conflict, and yet that's the attitude that people had.
And that's something else that I just can't understand, John. Which is, why would we uphold individuals and wealthy, privileged individuals at that over the broad masses of people? We should love the people. When people are being harmed, when the working class, when community folks are being harmed, well, you're not a hero of mine anymore if you're the power broker inflicting that harm. And it should be just that simple. But why are we so captivated by cult of personality figures? And what makes it so disturbing to me when I contemplate these things is, Barack Obama, in the case of when I'm arguing with my own family members, I point out, look, you might admire the image of a man. You might admire the rhetoric of a man on television. But let's just stop and pause as adults and realize rationally that he's not your family member. He's not your friend. And wait a second, he's not even your acquaintance.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mean to say that you are that compelled and that swayed by imagery that's been presented to you? We're supposed to know better than that.
Packaged up and
we're supposed to be more mature than that.
Yeah. Well, and
how can we work our way out of this without adult level thinking? Whatever adult level thinking would entail.
Well, and this is why I think it's important that people realize too. Look, we have to hold people accountable. So whether it's a Barack Obama or Donald Trump, you still got to hold them accountable. You can't just say, "Well, I like this guy. I don't have to do anything." I mean, and if you cast a vote and you say your civic responsibility is done, and you know what, and if you're only casting a vote based on, again, the quote unquote lesser of two evils, that's all the more reason that you better stay engaged. Because if you voted somebody that you didn't particularly like, but you think he was less evil than the one you hated, then that's all the more reason that you better stay on that person. Look, I'm not a big fan of voting on compromising your vote and voting for somebody you don't care for. But if you're going to do it, and even if you don't do it, look, whether you voted for Donald Trump or not, if you're an American, I hate to say it because people hate hearing it, that's your president. And if you voted in that system, you validated the system that delivered Donald Trump. The Electoral College didn't get invented by Donald Trump. I mean, these things, this is the system that you are willingly participating and then advocating for. This is the problem I have in Indian country. I hate to use that expression, but I did. This is the problem that I have with that is we've got native people out there saying, oh, we need to go out and vote. And you know what? If you looked at native territories and native people, there's probably, if you were to try to divide us at right and left, Republican and Democrat, if we fit in those boxes, we'd probably be split right down the middle too. There's no place that we're ever going to turn a red state blue or a blue state red. That's never going to happen. We might get the occasional congressperson elected, but you know what? We didn't actually get them elected. White people did. Deborah Haaland, she got elected by white people. Sharice David got elected by white people. And you know what? There have been a number of Republican congressmen and senators. Ben Nighthorse Campbell, when he first got into politics, he ran as a Democrat. switched parties, and continued on all the way up to the Senate as a Republican. And most people don't realize this. There was also most people don't realize, but there was a native vice president of the United States. Were you aware of that, Jeremiah?
No, I was not at all.
Charles Curtis.
Always educational listening.
Charles Curtis was a congressman, a senator. He was from Kansas, I think. He was a CAW. That's what his affiliation was. But he was a congressman, he was a senator, and would be the vice president of the United States. Heartbeat away from the presidency. And he was terrible for Native people. He didn't fix it from within. They never do. Ben Nighthorse Campbell didn't fix it from within. And I don't know. I mean, Deborah Haaland is a veteran, a military veteran, and she's basically towing she was a Democrat Party, whatever they call them, operative in the area that she was. She wasn't. I mean, these people were not bold leaders for Native people. Neither Sharice David nor Deborah Haaland. And I'm not calling them down, but let's not turn them into heroes for us. And if you think just because they got elected that's it, we're saved. We got a few people in Congress. I'm sorry. I have a problem with many of these people on everything from Venezuela to Cuba to Palestine, and almost none of them really come out with the position that I could ever support if I even voted in those elections. And I think this is why, look, just like we can talk about some of the positive attributes that Gaddafi may have been responsible for in Libya, that doesn't absolve him of the things that he does wrong and did wrong. I mean, and it's the same thing. If you like AOC, and look, I hear a lot of things she says that I think are positive, but you know what? I still have some problems with her position on many things. And if we don't hold these people accountable, and I don't have to be a voter to hold them accountable, I don't have to vote for them to hold them accountable. And I think that's my point. I think you were the one who brought up you look at some of these people in history. They were elected officials. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks.
Well, what's so important about Martin Luther King Jr. that I really wish more people understood is Martin Luther King Jr. never once in his life, in his career, endorsed a political candidate.
Yep.
He pressured people who were in office
to do the right thing,
to use their power responsibly, exactly, and do the right thing. He never sold himself out and said, oh, I support so-and-so for Congress. I support so-and-so for president. So, it's like, and people also, BAI listeners should know that it was quite a controversial thing that Dr. King spoke out against the Vietnam War. And I remember right here on these airwaves, a firsthand account of a friend, a comrade, an associate of Martin Luther King Jr. was sitting at breakfast with him when he was reading the newspaper and the Vietnam War had just officially started. And he pushed his breakfast plate away and said, I can't eat another bite until I've made a principled statement against this despicable war. And that's where I think we should be coming from. We should have that much respect for human beings. And that's one thing I want to raise, and maybe you have a thought on the mass psychology of these things, which is, a personal question I've wondered, which is, why do we think it's okay for a person with a suit on to kill, to authorize a killing? If a person on the streets pulled out a knife and shanked another person out of anger, if two people got into an argument and one person pulled out a knife and cut the other person, you would say, oh my God, what a disgusting thing to do. That person should be arrested. You can't have a person running around who's willing to harm other people with a knife. But if a person has an Ivy League education and they wear a nice suit, you say, oh, well, that's how politics is, and use these generic statements to dismiss things like the
anytime I hear somebody say,
Libya.
well, that's just politics. I mean, and frankly, it isn't just resigned to these Ivy Leaguers. And that's kind of why Trump gets the slack that he gets from his base. Much of his base doesn't support, the worst, characteristics of Donald Trump, but they look the other way. And even the ones who, the evangelical right, I don't even know how they even call themselves that when you consider their endorsement of Donald Trump. I mean, because of how much we're willing to look the other way, because he is wealthy, because he's white, and now because he's the president of the United States. Lindsey Graham was a staunch opponent. He talked mad about Donald Trump, and look at how neatly packed into his butt he became, as the presidency went on.
Yeah, I mean, the level of hypocrisy is just astonishing, and that's what I see as well. Is it's just quite interesting because if you make one statement, for example, then it's like people have already sort of pigeonholed you in one way or another without hearing you out.
And they backfill all the stuff. I mean, when I make the comment that Native people shouldn't be voting in the non-Native elections, the immediate response I got from all the people, so we should just do nothing then. Whoever said do nothing?
Exactly.
In fact,
that's exactly what I'm talking about.
I think when you don't vote, that is not doing nothing. I think you make a statement. Your refusal to vote is a bold statement. It's a statement saying, I have no confidence in the system, and I reject the candidates, all of them. I reject the process. And you know what? I will not participate in a system that is skewed in the way. And we can talk about what Sanders went through trying to run against Hillary. We can talk about the Electoral College. We can talk about so much that is wrong. The money in politics. But if you vote, then you're saying, well, it's what I got. This is what we got to work with.
Well, you know what I find really interesting? I mean, first of all, what you said at the top of the show, I found it quite compelling. I think you made a great case for indigenous people, Native people on their own territory to not vote. Why should you participate in a system that is not respecting you, not fully respecting your sovereignty, especially, as you stated, when you have your own governmental structures, even if they are not equivalently powerful? Focus on your own structures, focus on your own community. But what I also find interesting is that people are completely unaware of the basic philosophies and writings of Henry David Thoreau. Arguably the greatest, arguably the most important American philosopher, wrote on civil disobedience, and I don't know how many other, essays and seminal works, but, he made a very strong case against voting. And I always argue, well, if you think what I'm saying is wrong, and let me even say, first of all, I am someone who votes. I vote, I hold my nose, and I vote. I do the lesser of two evils style voting, and I don't feel very good about it, honestly, but that's a choice that I make that maybe we'll discuss later in the program. But the point is that I've also stated that I think voting is a very overrated political act. I think the real politics happens in the streets. It happens in the community. It happens at the grassroots.
It happens locally.
It happens locally. It happens, I believe in that crazy notion of power to the people. Yeah. But the point that I'm saying is when I say that, hey, I think you should vote. But when you do so, realize that is the most overrated political act on the list of political actions available to you. I get so much pushback. Oh, that's so irresponsible for you to say that. That's so crazy. I say, well, don't call me crazy. You sit down and write essays refuting Henry David Thoreau.
Well, and my point is, look, and I'm not telling Americans not to vote. I'm just saying that I'm reiterating what you are. Don't just think that that's your civic responsibility and it's done. But again, as a Native person, if you live on a Native territory, here's the other problem, and I didn't even bring it up. The problem is when you register to vote, you're saying the land that you live on is in somebody's congressional district. Interesting. I started this whole conversation because the Eighth Circuit handed down a decision supporting North Dakota's rejection of voter registration forms when Native people, and I say Native people, but because they're the only ones who have this condition, when Native people do not or can't put a legal residential address on most of them were using just their P.O. boxes. And North Dakota says, nope, that's not good enough. If you can't put a legal residential address, we are not going to approve your voter registration form. And the Eighth Circuit supported, backed up North Dakota's decision to do that. And of course now the response is, well, let's get all addresses. Nobody once is saying, well, wait a second, why are we jumping through this hoop? Why do they need our physical address? Why do they need me as a would-be voter to write on a form that where my home sits is in North Dakota? Why do they need to know that it's that I'm saying with my own form that I have to sign that my home is a part of North Dakota? Now, this is a whole property thing, and as a Mohawk living in Seneca territory, we don't regard the Seneca territory, Cattaraugus, Allegheny, any of our territories as part of New York State. We don't agree that where I live is in somebody's congressional district. But that's what they're trying to get us to do. So the problem I have is, even though we're a tiny population, why is anybody compelled to make us fill out a form that says where I sleep at night is in New York State or North Dakota or California or anybody else? And instead, we're just going to say, oh, well, let's just give them an address then. So, I mean, I have a problem with voting for a bunch of reasons, not the least of which has to do with our connection to the land, our relationship to the land, and who gets to claim it.
Those are very fair and valid points, and I tend to agree with everything that you're saying there, especially from the point of view from which you express it. And I would also say, when people get elected and they don't do what they say, there's no penalty whatsoever.
It doesn't even cost them. It doesn't even
cost them. There's not even a political penalty.
The moment they get elected, they begin running for the next election. Yeah. Hey, look, I got to take a break. Jeremiah, if you want to hang on, I'm going to take some calls. I don't know how much more one-on-one we'll get to do.
No, I'm here as long as you can hold me. I'm honored to be on with you.
Well, we're going to take a break. We're going to go to a song, and then we come back. We're going to go to the phone lines. The phone lines are the number to call in the studio is 212-209-2877. That's the studio line, 212-209-2877. We're going to quick break for a quick song. We'll come back to a couple of calls, and then we'll call it a day.
To go walk down Market Street, my new suit, my acoustic guitar, counting the cracks in the sidewalk till I reach my favorite bar. Familiar faces, familiar places, familiar graces. Familiar faces, familiar places, familiar graces. What to say, graces. To go walk down Wall Street where the billionaires smoke Cuban cigars, counting the souls in the sidewalk. No one knows who they are. Shattered faces, shattered places, shattered graces. Shattered faces, shattered places, shattered graces. What to say, Grace?
All right, hey, that's Logan Stats, by the way. If you're wondering, who is that incredible voice? That's Logan Stats. He's Mohawk from Six Nations in Ontario, and that's those are cuts from his CD, Goodbye Goldia. You can find that on Amazon, and by all means, pick it up. It's just some great sounds. Anyway, that's my buddy Logan Stats. I do have Jeremiah Hosea on the line via Skype from Belarus. He's joined us.
Where they have health.
Where they have health care. If you're gonna get sick, do it there, and then come back healthy.
Yeah, seriously, you pay an insurance, a simple $75 insurance just as a tourist, and you're entitled to Belarusian health care because they're actually civilized in that respect here.
Yeah, but they're not an impoverished country like the United States.
Right, of course.
All right, hey, I got to get right to the call. So, I know we got a bunch of people who jumped on the line. So, caller, you're up first. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, how's it going, guys? It's me, William, from Long Island.
Hey, William. Thanks for calling.
Hey, I just have two statements and one question. First statement, I feel like, when I'm listening to you guys, I feel like the Founding Fathers. Taxation without representation. Second statement, can you be a capitalist and want to collect Social Security? And last question, I'm a brown guy and I speak Spanish every once in a while. And people tell me, speak English. Is that in the Constitution, to speak English?
All right, let me try to tackle all three of them. For one thing, the taxation without representation. I did a show on the 4th of July. If you want to pull it up, I've got it as a podcast, and I talk about it. That was mostly BS, just so you know. That's not why the colonists revolted against Great Britain. The reason the colonists revolted against Great Britain were twofold. One of them was slavery. Yes, it was. It was slavery. The other one was they wanted to take more native lands. And King George said, no, we're not going to expand into Indian country at this point because we can't afford to. And the taxation, most of the taxation that was taking place in the colonies was to pay for the militias that were supposed to be keeping the frontier secure. So it wasn't like King George was getting all this money ripped out of the colonies and enriching himself. So, I mean, again, I'm not sure what the taxation without representation is. I think we all have that to a large extent. But most of the reason that people have taxation without representation is because after they cast a vote, they think their job is done. So there's that. Can you have capitalism and Social Security? Sure, capitalism has a lot of problems. And it doesn't mean that capitalism has to exist in a vacuum and that you can't have some level of free market and still have some level of socialism. I mean, these are not mutually exclusive ideas. The problem is when capitalism becomes the driving force on on all kinds of political, ideology, that becomes problematic. And no, there is no place in the Constitution that declares English the official language. At least not at the national level, and in fact, why would it be? I mean, I thought they fought a war against the Brits, but anyway. All right, let me go to the next caller. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Michael, and I'm calling from New Jersey.
All right, Michael, make sure your radio's turned down if you would.
It's down.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
I think I caught the last part of your show. You're saying we shouldn't vote. Is that correct, what we're saying?
That's not exactly what I said. I'm saying that Native people who live on a Native territory, whose land should not be considered in somebody's congressional district, and whose people are so limited that we don't affect the outcomes, that we are more empowered by standing as a distinct people than being, 0.2% of the U.S. population that will never affect change. So I'm telling Native people not to vote, but I'm not saying don't do anything. The rest of y'all, by all means, hopefully you can vote for somebody you really support and not just have to hold your nose, as my buddy Jeremiah said, hold your nose and pull the lever for the lesser of two evils. But if you do that, you still need to stay politically engaged, because it's not enough to cast a vote and say, there, my responsibility is done. I just don't, like Jeremiah was saying, I think voting is hyped up to mean, to lull people into believing that you really have control of your government by casting that singular vote, and that's not the case. I think voting is overrated, and I think we have to do much more politically and stay much more engaged, whether you vote or not. In fact, if you don't vote and you still hold elected, you still have every right to hold elected officials responsible, whether you voted or not, whether you voted for that candidate. If you didn't vote for Trump, you still have an opportunity you still have a responsibility to hold them accountable. So that's the whole point.
Well, I agree with you with that, but if you advocate not voting, that also tells a person to not get involved.
No, that's not. That's an assumption being made. I'm saying if you have to vote for somebody who you don't like, I mean, look again from a Native perspective. Hillary Clinton was pro-pipeline. So why should Native people have voted for him? Just to avoid Trump? I mean, and again, one of the things that Jeremiah pointed out, and this was an assessment by Noam Chomsky, Trump may actually, if you were to measure, certain activities, he may be less of a war criminal than Barack Obama was, because of surely by the number and the rate at which people were being killed for abroad. So if you look at that, and I'm not saying that's a reason to vote for Trump, but again, you have to hold people accountable. And I'm not saying, if you don't vote that you have no right to speak up. In fact, if you don't like that system, the election system, doesn't mean that you have to alienate yourself from from absolute governance.
Yeah, you're correct in everything you're saying, but human nature is going to say, if I don't vote, I'm not going to get involved. By people voting,
that's not Harriet Tubman said.
Yeah,
and that's what happens.
Yeah, but think about this: if you're no vote, if you don't vote, if you use your lack of vote as a statement, I mean, there are countries where you can actually go vote and cast a vote for no confidence. In this country, you can't do that. But one of the things you can do is you can make sure that if the next president is, I mean, if Trump, I mean, look at the case people make because Trump didn't even win the popular vote. And the number of people who voted. If you have low voter turnout, you're sending a clear signal to both parties. I don't support the way that you're putting candidates up. But if you go out and you say, look, as long as you produce a candidate, I'm going to vote for them anyway. Then what are you doing to force change? Not voting can have an effect. but it doesn't affect if you stay absolutely not engaged. But I appreciate the call, but I do understand, and I'm not telling people don't vote. I'm just saying that, just keep in mind that there's more to life, and there's more to being civically responsible than just going to cast a vote if you're an American. In my case, I don't consider myself an American, and I think so. I won't vote.
And actually, it might surprise you, John. I don't consider myself an American either, if I can explain that quickly, because as a person of African descent, we have seen one case after another of unarmed black people being murdered by the police, and their killers are actually, in the case of Zimmerman, for example, he wasn't even a police officer. He just said, I'm just going to murder a black kid. And we see one case after another, people murdering unarmed black people with impunity. And I go back to the Malcolm X lesson where he says, there's no such thing as a second-class citizen.
You're either a citizen or you're not.
So if you can murder me, you're either a citizen or you're not. And if you can murder me and get away with it, why should I kid myself?
And I have to throw a number into the mix, because actually Native people, as a percentage of our population, have a higher rate of death by cop than even black people do. And I'm not saying
that. I believe that.
There's only one. The only age group is the 16 to 21 age group is where black people surpass Native people in death by cop. That's the only age group. And again, I'm not saying this for bragging rights, but it just kind of puts it out there that it's and I hate to use I don't even like the word piece or the expression people of color, but just to be clear. All right, I probably got only time for one more caller, so let me try to do one more caller before I have to bid adieu to my buddy here. Caller, you're up next, and you're probably last. So, caller, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yes. Oh, I guess that's me.
Yes.
This is Diane from the Bronx.
Hi, Diane.
And, when I asked the other gentleman there about being part of the, doing the electoral process, when as of this moment, we still have that the electoral college is the way, the decision is going to be turned out. So if we haven't done anything different from the last election to this moment, then it took 4 million votes, and we still didn't get the popular, it didn't work. So are we going to need 10 million votes this time to make something happen?
Well, and the system was flawed. The Electoral College has its foundation in slavery. It was so slave states could have more representation at the federal level. That's where the Electoral College is a slave era concoction. So there's that. But here's the thing and you got to hold Hillary Clinton somewhat responsible. She knew the map. She knows which states had more electoral votes than their in proportion to their population. I mean, and I'm not saying the system is great, but she should have had more knowledge of the system, having had a husband that was elected twice and being involved in politics far more than Donald Trump. I mean, this is an absolute failure on her part. But you're right. The Electoral College does take votes away. It makes people's vote not count, and especially if you live in an urban area. That's the Electoral College is designed to punish the popular vote that comes out of urban areas. Go ahead, Jeremiah.
I was just going to say quickly, I believe that when that was brought to Donald Trump's attention that he lost the popular vote significantly, he pompously said, "Well, I didn't need to.
And
if I needed to, I would have."
And he could make that argument. And who's going to say he's wrong?
And one thing I would say, I've also heard the argument that the Electoral College is to prevent regional monopoly. Like, you don't want just the major cities dominating the country and the rural sectors of the country being, shoved to the side. But when we see the winning candidate losing by over 2 million votes in the popular vote, which is a relative landslide, and winning in the Electoral College in a relative landslide, I think it's fair to say it's a skewed system.
Well, that whole idea that it's about trying to keep a monopoly of power, that's the antithesis.
Prevent a monopoly.
That's the antithesis of democracy. So you're saying we're going to dismiss the actual one man, one vote, depending on where they live. I mean, which is weird. Hey, look, I do have one more caller on the line, and I know they were patiently waiting. So let me try to get one more caller before we go. Caller, you're next, and you're up last. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, my name is Africa from Newark, New Jersey. We accept what our leaders do, or our quote unquote leaders do, because we are coerced to. The media supports these people, prop them up. The entertainers prop them up. Like Toni Morrison just died. She was black. All black media people held her up, but she the one that told us that Bill Clinton was black. When I was a young kid growing up in the 90s, I remember she said I was the first black president, even though he sent me and everybody else I know in my neighborhood to prison. He was the first black president. And then now we got Colin Kaepernick and Jay-Z. Everybody's taking up for Jay-Z when it's clear nothing he's going to do or he's going to do with the NFL is going to stop any black person from getting shot. Like, it's clear he crossed Jay-Z.
Yep.
All the media people are telling us these people are who we should look up to, who we should respect. Yo, it's sad, man. Like, who do I vote for? I say nobody should vote. Everybody should lose confidence in the electoral system, make it fall, make it crash and burn. I think voting is the worst thing that we do as a society because we prop the system up. Who should I vote for? Cory Booker, who sold my water and privatized my school, or Kamala Harris, who hid evidence that would have got somebody on death row free? Like, how does she even walk around and not being prosecuted for what she did, or even keeping black people locked up because the state needed cheap labor? Like, this is disgusting.
Africa, I hate to cut you off because you're on a roll, and I mean to tell you, I agree with everything you just said. But
me too. I mean, honestly,
again, powerful words, and I thank you for participating in this show. Jeremiah, I want to thank you for joining me and taking some time out of your vacation or your trip or whatever's got you out there in Europe. I'm so grateful for you for taking the time and joining me.
It was such an honor and such a pleasure, Jonathan.
We'll get you in studio when you come back.
Can't wait to continue. Yeah, I look forward to that. And we're going to do an event at Verso Books on October 18th. So we'll get the information about that out there.
All right, sounds good.
The details come in.
That's Jeremiah Hosea, friend, colleague, and activist in his own right, from joining us by Skype from.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. All right, folks. I want to thank everybody for listening and participating. I want to thank the callers for participating. Great calls. I mean, and look. We're expressing opinions, but we're expressing opinions based on facts. And so I'm hoping people think about what their responsibilities are and not accept this notion that their civic responsibility is limited to. The assumption isn't that if you don't vote, you don't care. The assumption is if you vote, that's all you have to do. That's the problem. All right, this is John Kane. This is Let's Talk. We'll have Shawnee Rice back with us next week, and we'll pick it up from there. Yahweh.
Right out the window. Should've washed away my sin and done an honest way. Should've vanquished all my demons and broke free from that cage.